Well, hello, everybody. This is Lee Miller, your Executive Director of the Advanced Television Broadcasting Alliance, and we're giving this a few minutes for our participants to join us, and we'll get started here in just a few moments. All right, it's 2 minutes after the hour, and we're going to go ahead and get started today. I'm Lee Miller, your Executive Director for the Advanced Television Broadcasting Alliance, and we want to welcome you to our first in 2023 of our webinar series and on low power television issues. And I would like to invite Ari to join us. I think he's out there in the wings. There he is. Today we've got a lot of things to talk about. But first, a couple of other quick things. You saw at the beginning a screen of sponsors. We appreciate everybody that sponsors. Love to have more sponsors that join us. This is the time to renew your sponsorships for 2023 and to prepare for our NAB event. We will be having our LPTV day during NAB back at the West Gate. So we'll be back on that Monday night in April at NAB at the West Gate. During the day, we'll expect to have some sessions and also the LPTV awards. We'll brought those back. So well, Ari, earlier today, we had a meeting with the Federal Communications Commission, and it was a full room. I don't think I've been in a meeting with that many people, but it was really good to get before the FCC again and to discuss the issues of the low power TV industry. And so we brought you on today to kind of give us the I've got Post-it notes all over my desk in regards to what they wanted to bring to the industry. So let's just jump in right there, shall we?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So I thought it was a really good conversation. So the FCC, let's see, just to give some, I think there were probably 10, maybe close to a dozen people as part of the meeting, but we had Media Bureau Chief and the advisor to the chairwoman, Holly Sauer, was there. Video Division Chief Barbara Kreisman, Sean Maher, who works on LPTV issues, Mark Colombo, Evan Morris from the front office, Maria Malarkey from the Policy Division, Kim Matthews, who's working on the working on the LPTV protection item. So really a full house who was there to talk to us, to let us know what's going on from their perspective in terms of LPTV issues. So it was a really good opportunity for us to connect with them, to let them know what's on the minds of the LPTV industry and to get their feedback and hear what the FCC is thinking about and what issues they want to make sure that you, the members and the industry know about. There were 3 issues that we really wanted to discuss with them, kind of as the agenda setting items. One was the recently adopted LPTV Protection Act. Another was the possibility, which we've been hearing about for a little while now, of a new window for major modifications for LPTV stations. And the third was just the ATSC 3 transition and how that's going from their perspective, how that's going from our perspective, and what could be done to help move things forward. It was a very just kind of setting the scene. I thought, and Lee, I think you probably thought too, it was a productive dialogue. I thought, it was not a one-way conversation. There was definitely feedback coming from the FCC to us, which was good. And I think if there was an overlying takeaway from the meeting, from the FCC standpoint, it was help us help you. And what that means is they are trying, they would like to move forward on some of these items, and they are certainly open to working with the LPTV industry on a variety of issues. But there's really two overriding things and areas where they asked for the help of the industry. The first one is, I'll get to in a little bit in terms of comments for the LPTV Protection Act. But the second one is cleaning up the records and cleaning up the low power database. And that's really a problem point and really a pain point for them, I think, is that number one, there's just a bunch of stations that are still finishing up construction efforts, and they understand that and they appreciate that. And, they clearly expressed an understanding of the pressures that some low power licensees had faced in completing construction of some of their digital facilities. But certainly that's piece number one, is just moving forward with that, and obviously encouraging everybody to keep working as hard as they are working to try to complete construction and just get these resolved and get the analog era behind so they can move forward with helping us define what the digital era looks like.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I definitely understand as we look through the LMS, looking for contact information for a station owner. It's really, the record is very, very incomplete. And I definitely understand, the FCC, when they're trying to reach out to you and they can't get a hold of you, is an issue. And so you should check what you have in the LMS, in the database. Be sure the phone numbers, email addresses, contact names are correct and up to date, especially with the number of, swaps, CP, buyouts, things of that nature.
Yeah, and beyond that, making sure just that the records are up to date. It's worth going back and doing an audit of the station. If you've got a CP that expired 5 years ago or that was canceled 5 years ago, one of the things that they're concerned about is that a lot of those licenses are still showing up in the database. So the permit may have been canceled, but the facility itself hasn't been canceled. And if you can help out by either going in and requesting cancellation of those authorizations or reaching out to the FCC, they would appreciate it. That's just going to help clean up the database, get a more stable database, and give them confidence that the database is stable, which is important, because before they're going to move forward and start new windows where there's going to be potential conflicts, they want to make sure that they've got a good, clean record. So that was made clear. It was also made clear to me in a follow-on conversation that this isn't an opportunity for you to say, you know what, we canceled that CP 5 years ago, but can we get it back now? It's really a cleanup exercise, not
right. They are going to go look.
But to the extent that you've got those, and if you can identify those, that's really going to help everybody in the industry, to the extent that we're looking for assistance from the FCC with things like a major modification window and issues like that. So talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. You'll go ahead with your list, and I'll chime in if you miss something. How's that?
That sounds good. So talking about the three issues that I teed up front, the first is the LPTV Protection Act. So that passed or was adopted back in January. Depending on who you are and where your stations are, you're either thrilled with the legislation or you think it didn't go far enough. The FCC is working on its notice of proposed rulemaking. They have 90 days to initiate that proceeding, which takes us into early April. It sounds like it's going to take them every good bit of that 90 days, and you'll see something probably in the late March, early April timeframe to initiate that proceeding.
Right.
It's going to be a narrow proceeding. The FCC's view, and I don't have any reason to disagree with that, is that the statute does not give a lot of wiggle room to the FCC. There's not a lot of flexibility for interpretation. There may be some, and if folks want to comment on the areas where the statute provides some room for interpretation, I think that will be invited. If you want to support what the FCC is proposing, that will certainly be welcome. What they have asked us to get the word out that they do not want and that will be counterproductive is to use it as an opportunity to air your griefs about everything that's wrong with the way that low power television is regulated. There's a time for that, there's a place for that, but they would like to keep this proceeding as streamlined as possible and to keep the comments as germane as possible. So I pass that along not as an FCC member, but as somebody, you know, who's, as an organization, we're trying to build and maintain a good relationship at the FCC. So we relay that message. And really what it comes down to is they've made clear that they're looking at this proceeding as a narrow proceeding. So in a lot of ways, you're just going to be wasting your time. There's a time and there's a place to make the case for a lot of different issues as it relates to low power television. And there certainly are a lot of issues, but, you know, writing a treatise about, you know, why it's really important to protect a class that, you know, to protect a low power TV station in the top 10 markets, you know, and attaching a white paper is going to be great. But if there's just no argument for why you can actually do that under the statute, I think you're going to be wasting your time and your money and your resources that can probably be best used elsewhere.
And I look at it like this: why make I wouldn't say it makes the FCC angry. It's just like, it's an aggravation. Okay, I've got these documents I've got to go through that mean nothing to the proceeding, but they just waste time. And I understand there's a place for these. The legislation is pretty narrow, and the FCC is technically really not allowed to go beyond what the legislation speaks.
And look, certainly, you know, if you've got a station that's going to gain protection as a result of the act, the faster the FCC can get through that docket and get an order out, the better. If your stations are not protected by the act, but you've got something else you want, such as a major modification window or something else, the faster they can work their way through this proceeding and get it behind them, the faster they can turn to something else. So exactly. There's a time and there's a place for everything, but I'm sympathetic to their plea and certainly probably their anticipation regarding the scope of comments that could be filed and their request to try to keep it as narrow as possible. So that brings us to major modification window. So if you were on our webinar back in October of 2021, when we met with the FCC, they were open to the idea and let us know that they were exploring the possibility of both major modification windows for existing stations and possibly a new station window. So we asked about the status, and the indication was nothing's changed. I think it's a when. They are still very much open to the idea. They very much understand the plight of low powers and that there are very good reasons why some stations may need to move more than 30 miles, may need to move somewhere that doesn't have contour overlap with their existing station. But they're not ready to do it yet. It was really the message that and this goes to what we were talking about earlier, that they want to get the database cleaned up. They want to make sure to get all of the analog stations taken care of and licensed on digital before they're ready to move to that next step. So I think there was some optimism that things are moving in the right direction. They've got the list of remaining analog stations down to a manageable level, but there's still a bunch out there. So stay tuned. They certainly weren't ready to engage in a substantive discussion about what that was going to look like. But they certainly acknowledged, I think, that it would be beneficial. And the suggestion was that it's coming. It's just a question of when they're going to be ready to. Third issue we discussed was the ATSC3 transition. And for those of you who have been following the docket or reading the trade press, you'll know that the NAB went in, I think it's about 2 weeks ago now, and requested that the FCC create an ATSC3 task force. And the thinking is that the transition is, on one hand, going well. A lot of stations have transitioned, but we've hit an inflection point where the concept is proven. The industry has shown that it's possible talking particularly about the full powers to manage the transition and to get on the air in ATSC3. But now they need another push. They need something to show that there's a real commitment on behalf of the FCC to making ATSC3 a reality, and to moving the ball forward to allow the equipment manufacturers to continue to invest in ATSC3, to encourage broadcasters to continue to invest in ATSC3, and really to take it to the next level and show everybody that we are going to get to the point where it's not just ATSC1 content being simulcast on a second station, but where there's opportunities for innovation and for a lot of the promises to come to reality on what ATSC3 has to offer. We reiterated as an organization that that's something from the perspective of low powers, and particularly as an organization like ours that's been behind ATSC3 for some time, that it would be excellent for the FCC to create a task force and to do what it can to put its weight behind the transition, and that would be good for the low power industry as well. The response was that they're working on it. They're considering what they could do that would be meaningful, but it is certainly on their radar, and they were not dismissive of the concept. They did ask that if folks are doing anything, if you've started to, whether it's on a programming standpoint, a data standpoint, if you're broadcasting in ATSC3 and you're doing something that's innovative, the FCC wants to know about it. And I think that will be helpful in selling to the FCC that this is moving forward and that there's a real public interest benefit in getting behind that. So if you've transitioned to ATSC3, or if you're working on a business plan to transition to ATSC3, it would be helpful to, whether formally or informally, let the FCC know what you're working on, because they want to see that momentum. And as they said, they're reading the trade press, they see what's being talked about publicly, but if there's any more detail you can share, that would be really helpful to the FCC.
Right. The FCC really does want to hear what about LPTV and what we're doing out in the marketplace. And if you're not willing to necessarily want to share with the FCC, share it with us, and we'll share it, or even share it anonymously with the FCC, so that they know that what you are doing in that space. And it just gives more promotion for the LPTV industry as we present those things to the FCC. And a couple of other things, you got to our three there, but they also talked about the repack funds. And
yeah, that's right. So we also had on the call representatives from the Incentive Auction Transition Task Force, who are responsible for the repack and the reimbursement process. And as I think all of you probably know, the deadline has now passed for low power stations to submit their reimbursement requests. There's still a few stations, particularly ones that have tolling requests, that may have extensions open in very limited circumstances, but for the most part, just about every low power station should be done with at least the initial phase of the reimbursement process. So the two requests that they had on that front were, number one, if you're done, if you've been fully reimbursed, make sure you go into LMS and close that out. That's just one more area where it just takes up time and effort on their part to go back through and check if they've got a station that's still open, why it's still open, make sure they can close it out. And they're doing that on the back end where they need to, but it's just an extra step in the process where they've got to reach out to the station, make sure that the station truly is done and intends to close out, and then close that out. So if you can go through your stations and go in and do that, that would help the FCC, and again, I think help the industry as a whole, showing that we're responsible licensees and citizens. The other piece of that, in addition to closing out, is to what Lee said earlier, making sure your contact information is correct. And if somebody from the FCC or from EY, who's the fund administrator and going through all of the reimbursement requests, reaches out, make sure that they've got the right contact information, that they can reach you, And B, if they do reach out, that you respond promptly, because first of all, it's in your interest. If they're reaching out, they're trying to get you money for the most part. So it's in your interest to be responsive, get them the answers they want so they can check that box, approve that reimbursement, and get the money into your account. But the second thing is, again, they said there's some licensees that they're just spending a lot of time just trying to track down and figure out how to reach them and how to get them to just respond to questions that are being asked. So make sure your contact information is right. If you get an email from the reimbursement fund, I think it comes from fund administrator or a couple different email boxes, try to respond to those quickly. It's in your interest and it's in their interest as well.
Very good. That will help everybody getting LMS updated and responding to those calls by administrators and the FCC itself. So I think that checked all the boxes on my list. Did that get all of yours?
I think so.
All right. Well, we've got time for a couple of questions, and we'll try to. This is February, so if you want to get your groundhog out, Ari, and kind of guess on some of these things, but Jonathan was wondering if there was any about the old idea of the pathway to full power with Class A stations. Is there any movement on that front? First off, the ATBA does have a committee, a subcommittee working on that. And just a reminder for subcommittees, the ATBA has subcommittees available to membership to join those subcommittees if you want to participate in those items. So I'm going to pitch it back to you, Ari. What's your thought? Is there any movement on that front other than what we're doing as a subcommittee?
Well, and I think that tees up two issues here. One being the path to full power for Class A stations, which I have not heard a lot about. I think that's essentially a dormant issue at this point. I don't think there's been a big push for it, and I don't think it's on the FCC's agenda, and I don't think it's anything that industry has been at least aggressively pushing for at this point. The separate issue that wasn't asked in that question, but I think is worth addressing is, we know this legislation creates a path for low power stations to potentially receive protection under Class A status if you're in, the bottom roughly 40-ish markets in the country. But what about everybody else? And I think that's an issue that's much more on the forefront. I think there's thought being given, certainly in our organization, and I think, from a lot of broadcasters, particularly low power broadcasters around the country, of how do we convince the FCC and what's the path forward to provide some extended protection for low power stations, particularly stations that are, whether it's investing in local content or in innovative services. And as the ATSC3 rollout advances and there's new services being offered, some of which, whether they're educational, whether they're public safety, whether they are just local news and information, there's a lot of different great, very valuable services that low power stations can offer and will have a lot greater capacity to offer going forward. So that's very much at the forefront. I think you're probably likely to see a lot more discussion about that than about a path to full power from Class A, at least in the short term. But it's a tricky issue, and it's an issue where full powers and low powers may not be on the same page, and there's a lot of details to work through there and a lot of different factions to work through, but it's certainly something that's on the mind.
All right, and let's address the next level of that question that Ruben also asked if there was any time frame for the open window for new applications, and Robert asking because he tuned in late, is there any indication of an unrestricted window for LPTV applications?
Yeah, I think there is. When we didn't get into a long discussion about new applications today, but we have discussed it with the FCC in the past. And typically the FCC has paired major modification windows with new windows. Sometimes there's a staggering to it. Sometimes they do it all in one fell swoop. But I think it's highly likely that if the FCC is thinking about doing a major modification window, they will also think about a new application window. And there's a practical reason for that, which is, I think realistically, if they open up a major mod window, you're going to see a lot of existing stations trying to move from more rural areas into more urban areas. Not every case, but I think I think it's fair to say that there will be a lot of that. So you're going to have some vacant areas that need to be filled and that would benefit from low power service. So in terms of just spectrum efficiency, and with the understanding particularly that these are probably all going to be secondary services at the time, it makes a lot of sense for the FCC to create that opportunity and to open up a new opportunity for new applications in addition to allowing for major modifications. But again, I don't think there's anything imminent with that. I think it's definitely on the radar. And I think that as we finish up the analog to digital transition, I think the FCC will take both of those on.
Yeah, and I think it's upon us to get those things done and taken care of as soon as we can, so that we can move forward with those.
Yeah.
A couple of other questions, Francis. And this is just what we were talking about, a guesstimate to when the FCC might expand the 1 year, one hot move beyond the 30 miles. That would be a modification.
Yeah, and I think one of the things the FCC's that they've addressed with us in the past is what restrictions can they put on major modifications, and whether it's a mileage restriction, whether it's an NDMA restriction, whether there's something else. They've got a lot of flexibility to do that, and they've done it different ways before. But the general thought process would be that under the current minor modification rules, you're limited to 30 miles and you have to have contour overlap. So a major modification window would allow stations to do more than that. Whether that limit is 40 miles, whether it's 60 miles, whether it's 100 miles, I don't know what it's going to be. I suspect the FCC is not going to want a station in to be moving from the West Coast to the East Coast or anything like that. But so there will probably be some constraints on it. But yeah, that's the idea, is it would be something greater than 30 miles.
Well, Tim had asked about, new stations should be limited to 10 applications. Major mods should be limited to existing licensees. We've discussed that some. Any thoughts on that for you?
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that's going to get strong consideration at the FCC, putting again some kind of guardrails around that. Just to limit their processing ability and to make sure that there's not a flood of applications that they can't deal with, and that they're not going to have auctions across the country for all these mutual exclusivity groups. And then B, to create a fairness, and I think it's consistent, particularly if it comes out under the existing administration that's looking for ways, assuming with a Democratic chair, and if they ever do get a majority at the FCC, which we'll see if that happens or not, but trying to increase diversity of voices in the broadcast community. So I think seeing some kind of a limit on the number of applications is highly likely, but again, they're just not at the point of really ironing out those details yet.
All right, we have hit the 30-minute mark. And Ari, is there anything else on your list you'd like to get out today?
No, I think that covers it all. That's all I got.
All right. We want to appreciate everybody joining us for today's FCC update from the Advanced Television Broadcasting Alliance. And I'm going to put up our screen there and thank some of our folks, and also visit the Broadcasting Alliance website and join. We would love for you guys to become members of the ATBA. Many of you that are on this webinar are not members. We've got some member things coming up. We would love to have you join one of our subcommittees and get active in our processes. Love to have you a sponsor at our NAB LPTV Day on Monday during NAB at the West Gate, back in the same location where the LPTV event has been for almost 40+ years, except for last year and during COVID. And but we will be at the Westgate, same location. We'll be in the suites earlier in the day doing sessions. If you have a session you would like to suggest or something that you would like to learn on, also you can email us at info@broadcastingalliance.org and state what you would like to do, or if you've got a white paper or something you would like to present, do let us know. We'll be filling out that schedule shortly. We have invited our FCC friends to join us for that day, depending on who's going to be traveling. I don't believe they know that yet, but we'll let you guys know as soon as we have that information as well. But sponsors, if you're a sponsoring organization or member that has a membership with it, or you can just simply become a member. And I believe once you leave the webinar today, that page should pop up, but you can find that at broadcastingalliance.org. Anyway, I'm Lee Miller, your Executive Director for the ATBA. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you guys next time.